Okay, time to get a little bit more into network stakes. This is fun because we've part of what we do, some people like it, some people don't, is we get into some really obscure, almost philosophical futurology type of ideas. And
eschatomics.
Yeah, that's right. And we see it coming. See it coming from miles away, and it seems very obscure, seems very strange, and then seems like overnight, with the blink of an eye, those concepts are upon us, and they're sort of the leading ideas of how the elite humans are sort of organizing society. And this network state thing is one example. And an article came across my desk here that was this weird bait and switch. And I think it's a really good piece of insight into network states and how the presentation of this idea, because it's really weird. It's a weird concept.
Yeah.
I
was going to say that I can give you the one sentence informal description from the author of the network state book. Here's how he did it in one informal sentence. A network state is a highly aligned online community with the capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory around the world and eventually gains diplomatic recognition from pre-existing states.
Yeah, and that's sort of the ultimate, I think, manifestation of the network state, which is basically, you could put it in this language, it's basically a country that does not have physical borders. Your citizenship no longer belongs within borders, but your citizenship belongs to a network. And instead of using borders to separate citizens of different network states, you are separated by your data. Your data is what determines your citizenship. And your data determining your citizenship determining the rules that you're allowed to live by, or maybe the rights you have, or the laws you're subject to. So it's basically a country, but without geographical borders. And the example could be, this is not the best example, but it may help one understand the difference between like Facebook and Twitter. If you're on Facebook, you're part of Facebook land. If you're Twitter, you're part of Twitter land. You have citizenship in those areas. In this case, we have to imagine a world where you can't be citizens of both, but who knows? There's nothing saying you can't be a citizen of two different network states. And you might be thinking, oh, it's already like this. It's like Reddit and blah, blah, blah. No, this is like very literal. Your legal citizenship could belong to a network state instead of a geographic state. Now, Time Magazine had an article come across here, and the article goes like this. The headline is "Why Borders as We Know Them Won't Survive the Century to Come."
Oh, this so they're hijacking the network state thing to try to do the no borders thing, huh? Is that what's going on here?
So exactly, we've got... This is it's a very well written article, and it's pretty dense, but I recommend, if anybody has time, you can find the link in the show notes that are in your email box right now. If you don't get our show notes, we send out all the sources to every show before the show. Go to canarycry.party and sign up for the newsletter. But it kind of starts like this. I'll give you a summary and then get to the good part. Our modern world now has more borderlines than ever before in human history. Not only that, but walls, barriers, and fences, and the repressive border policies that go with them are in clear view across the political and consequently physical landscape. At the end of the Cold War, just 12 border walls stood around the globe. Today, that figure has risen to 74, with the majority of construction since the beginning of the 2000s. What is becoming less clear, however, is what they are actually dividing. While bordering has existed for millennia, how borders are conceived and operated has changed considerably. Our present system is only 350 years old, product of a peace treaty in the 1648 settlement of Westphalia drawn up after decades of European religious war. Its basic principle established the right of a monarch's exclusive authority over religion, government, taxation, law, and the military within a specific geographical area, where previously political dominion in feudal Europe had been impossible to map spatially. Borders offered clear lines of separation and control. And so, this idea of borders as we know it is only about 350 years old. Sort of funny enough.
Things more territorial back then. It wasn't actual, because people weren't as equipped with the geography.
There just was
like
no way to deal with borders. Right. Okay. Like you could have castles that belonged to one monarch that, if you think of borders in our sense, existed beyond the borders of their kingdom. And this idea that a very specific geographical location for sure belongs to one monarch or another, it was a fairly young idea, 350 years old. And then they give an interesting history of borders. Sovereignty comes into this, and even how current geopolitical borders and the idea of what they actually separate is really even as young as World War I, stuff like this. Now, of course, they talk about the current Ukraine crisis and how borders go into there. They talk about border walls, talking about of course, the American Mexico border wall. They talk about Trump. They talk about, I believe they bring up the Israeli border wall. Really just focusing in on this stuff.
The refugee thing in Britain.
Now, yes. So this part's what leads us in. So then they talk about extending borders, extending border control. So you think of a border, you walk up to a border and you may have a guard, and the guard either lets you in or out. But in the 20th century, countries started to extend their border control. They give the example of the British government when refugees are washing up on their shores. They take those refugees and they send them to Africa. They would send them to Rwanda. But then they would start outsourcing borders to other countries. For example, in the U.S., kind of how we try to make Mexico responsible to stop border crossings before they even come to us.
Right.
There was the big, what was it? Where was it? It was like the Guatemalan parade or something, where you had a huge group of refugees coming up from the south of Mexico, from other South American countries, going through Mexico to try to get to the U.S. And so the U.S. expanded their border control by sending agents to Guatemala. This was in 2019. So to keep Guatemalans from coming to America, they would go to Guatemala and try to keep them there. Sort of this idea of extending your border into other countries. And this brings us into data borders. And it goes like this. Alongside this has emerged a new data landscape as our governments gather and store ever more information about us, often now sharing it with other states as part of joint security arrangements. The process of international travel is as much about the journey of our digital surrogates as it is about our analog selves. So talking about your digital identity. And that's not just your name and your social security number. This is your name, your social security number, and your entire lifetime worth of Google searches, your entire, activity on TikTok. Everything goes into your digital surrogate. In July 2022, when the British Home Secretary announced an initiative to create a contactless digital border so that the UK border could become the most effective in the world, these implications were made plain. And in January this year, when the Biden administration outlined its new measures for border enforcement to, quote, expand and expedite legal pathways for orderly migration. A key component was an online portal for migrants with a smartphone app that can begin the process of digitizing the undocumented. Borders are pushing outwards, but they are also simultaneously looking inwards, focusing on the unique terrain of the individual. So we have Time Magazine bringing up this idea where the border is not on a line on a map. The border is who you are. The border is in this case, your digital self.
We are each a state.
And this is the idea behind network states. It's not where you are that determines your citizenry. It's who you are that determines your citizenry. Such developments, particularly in the wealthy, data-obsessed global north, are surely inevitable. So they're calling this inevitable. But it does beg the question, what happens to people from less technologically advanced part of the world? Could those who have no digital presence, the poorest and most unfortunate, be bordered out of large swaths of the earth? And might this be the point? And even for the data-rich citizen, the implications are unclear. The importance of the individual has always been at the heart of the development of universal human rights. At the same time, as we have seen in China, data-driven state surveillance has become a tool for exercising all-encompassing authoritarian social control, bordering behaviors, rewarding the patriotic and punishing the non-patriotic. This is a long way from guards on a wall, looking out for intruders on the horizon. The reality is that borders as we know them, or as we thought we knew them, are fracturing and failing. While many may cling to the illusion offered by walls and fences, these barriers and the cartographical lines that they mark have already become semi-symbolic spaces as the political focus shifts beyond them towards managing and arresting the global movement of the displaced or zooms in on the minutia of the personal. So I know that this is a little bit dense and they're putting it in Time Magazine words.
Yeah.
But what they're saying is the future has no borders, but not quite like a Hillary Clinton no borders thing. It's not that the border doesn't exist. It's that the border is who you are. And what this means for individuals who don't have as much data behind them or have a phone or blah, 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 this type of thing. And the network state system only works if the citizen has data, if they participate in the data system. And this is why you see Biden-Harris cybersecurity movement thing trying to take responsibility for all the citizens' data in the US. It's no longer up to the individual. It's no longer up to a small business or whatever. It is up to the state of America, not necessarily the geographical state, but the network state of America to contain its citizens within its digital border. And that's the thinking behind not letting Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, not letting any other state gain your data, is because who owns your data, technically, in the nation state concept, owns you. So there is very much this war for citizenry, and what we're seeing is sort of the sort of infant stages of current geopolitical, geographical power structures positioning themselves and trying to lock in the borders of your mind, the borders of your individual
citizenship or citizenry.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're trying to lock in these digital citizenships because, I mean, I think the fact that they made this official and put out the documents and stuff, it shows that that's the direct. They know the world is going this way.
Hey, everybody, join the Joe Biden hairy leg chain. Be part of the Joe state, baby.
And we'll get into some other fun examples that sort of
freedom for personal choice.
Illustrate this. Now, the Time Magazine article is hilarious because then it goes into climate change and how, the migration of people because climate change and that's why borders don't matter because everybody's moving out of blah, blah, blah. It's this perfectly crafted neoliberal case for network states. And, for it to show up in something like Futurism or a weird podcast, that's one thing. But for Time Magazine to be making a broad mass appeal to network states under the guise of, liberal policy making or liberal citizenry or whatever, shows just how the progression of this idea and how close it is to being the reality that, we have sort of pontificated on over the years.
Yeah.
For example, if you want to now this is going to be a hard concept for people to grok, but I think we have some very illustrative examples of what a nation state could look like.
Network state.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.